everyone, it's Priya here, and in today's video I'm going to be doing a drawing of a Hyacinth Macaw Parrot, and I'm going to be using color pencils for this drawing. I'm also going to be using a cold press watercolor paper for this illustration. Now the reason I'm using the cold press watercolor paper, which is more textured than my regular hot press watercolor paper, which is much smoother, is because I want to see and experiment with what kind of texture, like what will the texture look like in my final image and how that impacts the final image. I'm also going to be using the Derwent Light Fast color pencils for this illustration, and I'll also be using the Derwent blending pens for this drawing. Now, just to give you a bit of a timeline, this video was actually filmed prior to my previous video where I discussed the different ways and methods that you can blend your color pencils to get smoother blends. So if you'd like to see more in-depth details and explanations of that, you can watch my previous video. That will be all discussing the blending of color pencils. But in today's video, I'm only going to be doing the illustration. And like I said, I've used these pens in this video prior to filming that video. So now what I'm basically doing at this point is I am just layering in the pencil onto the paper. Now keep in mind that this is cold press watercolor paper, so it has a lot of texture. So you're going to see that texture show through even when I'm going to be blending. But I want to see how that can impact my image, and also to see how it will look in the final, well, how my final result will look. So you can see I'm layering in multiple layers of pencil. Now bear in mind that I am using different colors here. I'm not just using a gray, I'm using various colors because the beak, according to my reference photo, has got a lot of browns. It's even got some purples in there. It's got the gray. So I want to incorporate all those colors into my drawing. And just bear in mind also that when you are doing a color pencil drawing, if you want the image to have a smooth blend, please ensure that you have enough pigment on the paper so that you have even coverage of the pencil on the paper once you blend. Now I'm using the Derwent blending pens for this illustration. You can see it comes in two sizes. One is a broader tip nib, and then the second one is a smaller nib, which is better for, you know, your smaller areas where you just like maybe an eye, where you don't need such a larger nib. Now you could use the odorless mineral spirits, which is what I usually use, or pencil blend, the Zestage. You could use that as well. It's entirely up to you what you want to use, but at this point I just wanted to try out these pens and see how they blend, because this was my first time using this. Like I said, this video was filmed prior to my previous video where I'm discussing the various methods of blending pencil. Now the good thing about using these methods of blending is that you can add multiple layers. So once I've done a layer, I can blend it and then let it dry, and then go back to that area and then add more layers of pencil, or either leave it that way or blend again and add more pencil. It's entirely up to you what you are trying to achieve, and you'll see how the look will be to your preference depending on what subject matter you're painting or drawing, and you know what effect you want to have. Because sometimes having this textured effect helps for the image. Like for example with the beak, I think the texture of the paper really helps me to show some of those textures on the beak without having to create those textures. Now I'm moving on to the eyes, and I'm just coloring in some of the areas around the eyes. Now you can see when I started working with the yellow, I actually went over some of the pencil and I didn't lighten it. Now I always mention to my students that I advise them to please lighten your image with a eraser or kneaded eraser before starting with color pencil. Now in this case, I didn't worry too much about it because I am going to go through with darker colors over, so you won't see much of that pencil showing through. But if you were to have a lighter color into your final color, you're going to have a problem with the pencil showing through. So just bear that in mind when you are doing your color pencil drawings. Lighten them as much as you can without losing the reference or your reference lines, and then, you know, build up the layers on that. Now you can see I'm just building up different layers of yellow, and I'm slowly, you know, just trying to get all those colors in, adding some more textures with the pencils. And then now I'm going in with the blues. Now with the blue for the parrot, I'm keeping the direction of my strokes in the direction of the feathers. Now usually with hair I would also say keep it in the direction of the hair growth, or fur, it would the direction of the fur growth. In this case, I'm keeping it in the direction that the feathers are going to be in. So pay close attention to your reference photo and try to make sure that those feathers or the directions of your pencil strokes are going in those directions. Now, like I said earlier, that you need to have a lot of pigment on the paper before you blend. But if you're just trying to cover the white of the paper and you're not too worried about getting a perfect blend immediately, you're going to be putting multiple layers of pencil on before you blend, then it's fine for you to just cover the paper with enough pigment to get smooth coverage of the pencil over the paper without having to worry about building up too many layers of pencil. So you can see I'm going in with some purples and some blues, and I'm just trying to get all of that white of the paper covered. So I'm basically not paying attention to trying to get details or shadows in. I'm just trying to just cover the paper. Now also bear in mind that when you are working with color pencils, it's advisable to work from light to dark because you can darken areas that you need to. Now I'm just going in with some indigo and I'm adding some shadow areas. Now it's very important to pay attention to your highlights and your shadows and make sure that your highlights are as light as you can keep them and your shadows are as dark as you can keep them. Now in this case, for the shadows and the darker areas, I'm not using the black. I'm not using black pencil. I'm using the indigo. Now I very rarely will go to black. Like for example, for the eye, I use black. But when I'm doing any shadow areas, I'm trying to keep it to a color that's the darkest color of the main color that I'm putting down. So in this case, I'm putting down blue. So I'm using a indigo to be my darkest color. You could also use maybe a dark gray or a purple as well. But I try not to use black because I think black is too it looks too artificial and I think it doesn't blend well with the final image. So I think it's better to just use a color that's for your piece, whatever you're working on, that will go in and be a dark color, but it'll also blend well and not have these smudges of black going through the entire piece. Now I'm going over with the blending pen. Now I don't have a lot of pigment on the paper, but the reason why, as I said, I'm going over with the blending is just to cover the white of the paper. I am going to go through and blend more or add more layers and then blend. So that's not a problem because that's when I'm going to really start defining the feathers and the direction of the feathers and the shapes and the shadows, and all of that's going to come through as I'm working on this piece. So at this point I am using the blending pen, but I would say that using the blending pen takes a little longer for larger areas. Even though I'm using the larger pen, then it would be for me to use a brush with maybe the zested pencil blend or using odorless mineral spirits. That would go faster if I was using a brush because I can use larger brushes to get coverage over larger areas. Now also remember, when you are using the mineral spirits or zested, you don't need a lot, so try to keep it to a minimum of what you need on your brush. You don't need to have a load of it because you need it to dry before you can go over with more pencil, then you can reblend. If you have the paper too soaked with it, it's going to take longer for it to dry. Now you can see now I'm going in with various blues and I'm just trying to get the directions of the feathers and also darkening some areas which I need it to be darkened, and also creating those look of the different feathers. I've also got some purples in there because that is the colors according to my reference photo that the parrot has got. There's some purple feathers as well as some a lot of blues, so I'm trying to just incorporate all of that into my final drawing. Now with color pencils, it is a slower medium, but you can achieve a good result if you take your time. So you need to be very patient when you are working with color pencils because you're not going to get an immediate result. You need to have a vision of what you're trying to achieve and slowly build your layers up to that point of what you want to achieve. You won't be able to put down one lot of color and expect it to be, you know, a finished piece or to be more realistic looking or three-dimensional. If you want something to look three-dimensional and more realistic, you need to really pay attention to the shadows and the highlights. Keep the shadows as dark as they can be, and also pay attention to the directions of the feathers, the fur, whatever subject you are painting. Pay attention to the details in the reference photo. Study your reference photo so that you can apply those, you know, you can see what you need to do and apply the necessary techniques that you need and the necessary layering that you need in order to achieve that look of having a realistic drawing. So you can see I'm just blending the entire area again. I went over it again, and like I said, it's a time consuming process. It takes time. You need to have patience. If you rush through any of the steps, you're going to end up with a piece that's not looking complete. Now, I will say that the camera is filming this much lighter than it is, because the actual drawing of the parrot is quite a darker blue, but I think because of the lighting, it has, you know, come up on camera being much lighter. And now I'm going again with the indigo, and I'm just trying to really define some of those feathers and really get some of that detail in. Now, when you are blending the color pencil, you don't need to stop at the blend when you are finished blending. You can blend the color pencil and then, you know, leave it that way, or you can go in afterwards with another layer of pencil which can give it texture, and you don't need to worry about blending that through. It all depends on what you are trying to achieve and the look you're trying to achieve and what you want your result to be. So a smoother look would mean you have to go more in with more layers of blending, whereas if you want to have a bit of texture showing through, then you could just, you know, blend and then go over with the pencil and leave it at that and not, you know, blend it again. So you can see at this point, I'm just layering in different colors. Now, as I said, with the cold press watercolor paper, you're going to have a lot of the texture still showing through, irrespective of you blending and covering the white of the paper. Now, had I used my usual hot press watercolor paper, I would have a very smooth blend and there won't be any texture. But that's what I was trying to experiment here and see, how does cold press watercolor paper affect my final results for a color pencil drawing. And also, if you want to use watercolors and then go over that with color pencils or markers as your base and then go over with color pencils, if you were using hot press watercolor paper, it'll be much smoother. With this paper, it will still have some of the texture showing through because of it being a more rougher texture of the paper. So I guess that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful. And I hope that you can take some inspiration from this to experiment with your art and try different things. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and share. It really helps the channel out. And if you'd like to see other art videos like this and other sketchbook tours and other videos that I have up on my channel, then you could consider subscribing. Don't forget, if you subscribe, to hit the notification bell so that you will be notified as soon as my next video is uploaded. So I guess that's it for this one. Thanks again so much for watching. Till the next one. Bye.